Hi and welcome to the second video in this series of basic face painting tips. Today we're going to talk about line work. Now, understandably, some newer painters can be a bit frightened of line work, and the idea of achieving symmetry is terrifying because line work can actually make or break a design. But I guarantee you that once you've watched, whether it be this video or any of the other brilliant ones that are online, and you've practiced and you've got the strokes that you need to know in your muscle memory, you will be absolutely fine and there'll be no need to worry at all. So just in case you don't know what muscle memory is, it's the act of doing something without even thinking about it because it's been committed to your muscle memory. Let's take shoelaces, for instance. If your shoelace comes undone, you just bend down and you tie it. You don't even think about it. But at one point in your life, you didn't know how to do it, and somebody, probably a parent, had to show you. They had to show you to cross this bit over here and that bit over there, and so on. And for the first few times you were doing it, you were thinking that process through. You were thinking this bit has to go here, this bit has to go here. And now, as I say, you just do it. It's exactly the same with face painting. Okay, so there are lots and lots of brushes out there that will do special line work for you. But these things I'm going to show you today are the ones that you do with your normal standard round brush. They're the basics used in most, if not every design, and they are a teardrop, spots, and tiger stripes, or TTT lines, or thin to thick to thin lines. Starting with teardrops, there's a couple of different ways you can do them. You can either do them thick to thin or thin to thick. I personally prefer thick to thin, so that's the one I'll show you first. So all you do is you lay your brush down on the skin. I find it better if you keep a right angle towards the skin, because that way you can press down and the bristles splay out, and then you move in the direction of the teardrop, and as you move you lift your brush off to end in a nice thin point. Okay, we're now going to do the other way, which is thin to thick. It's really just this process in reverse. So instead of starting with your brush steady and then moving, you start with your brush moving and finish with it steady. So move onto the skin like that and then press down, let the bristles splay out and then lift off. Once more. And press down and lift off. Onto dots now. And all you need to do is make sure you've got enough paint on the end of your brush, dot it down onto the skin, and then keep going. And the amount of pressure you put dictates the size of the spot. So very gentle gives you a tiny spot, and harder gives you a bigger spot. The only thing you need to be aware of is not to press too hard, because if you press too hard like that, your bristles will bend or they'll splay out and you'll end up with a weird shape, which you've then got to fix. It's easier to just, you'll get used to the limitations of your brush and you'll get used to knowing what works and what doesn't. And finally to these lines. Now all these are, if you look at this one in particular, if I put a line there, all that is a thin to thick teardrop joined on to a thick to thin teardrop. So in the same way as you did this, you start thin by moving, you press down, and then like you did with this one, you're pressed down and then you draw the paintbrush up off the skin and you've got your triple T line. Now this one looks a bit fuzzy, and that's because I've wiggled it in the middle. If you're doing something and you want the fur to look a bit more realistic, just give it a wiggle in the same way as, same motion, but you just wiggle it in between. This one is exactly the same stroke, it's just longer and thinner. I just didn't press my brush as much. So I started thin, pressed it a little bit more, finished thin. Right then, let's think about what we might use these for in our designs. So teardrops, you can use, if you do a few of these upon a princess crown or on a mermaid, they can look very, very pretty. But they're not just for girly designs. Let's say you're doing a monster. This is the person's mouth. If you do a teardrop here and a teardrop here, then your monster has fangs. If you want your monster to have horns, all you do, top of the face, is you do a horn. Now that one's a little bit thin, so what I might do is I might just do another teardrop there to meet it and then fill them in. Or if I was using a different type of brush, like a filbert, I could do that probably in one stroke. If you're drawing a dolphin or something like that and you want splashes to be coming from underneath its tail, just do a load of teardrops. And those are the splashes. If you've done a butterfly, so you've done a butterfly, and then you want to give it some antennae, teardrops are perfect for that. Teardrops are also great for doing on your butterfly to give it some dimension. And also, as well as the big fangs, if you want to do little teardrops as the little teeth, they work equally well also. Spots are versatile too. They're very good space fillers. So you could add them to, say, the end of these splashes to make them look more like moving water. You could put them on your butterfly. You could also use them as texture on your monster if you haven't got a stencil. They also are nice if you've done a design, say, I often do flowery designs, and I'll put spots around them just to make them pop a little bit more, especially if you do spots in a contrasting colour. So the tiger stripes obviously can be used for tigers, but they can also be used on leopards. So if you do the same stroke but in a circular-ish movement, thin to thick to thin, that makes a good leopard spot. Wiggle it as well if you want to get a less uniformed shape. They're great for outlining, which I'll show you in a second actually, but they're amazing for swirls. Also fabulous for outlining butterflies. Now here I drew an outline. Well, if you start with a teardrop and then join another teardrop to it, which in essence you're doing thin to thick to thin, and you carry on doing that, then you've got a lovely outlined butterfly. So earlier I mentioned that you might use these in most, if not all, designs, and I've done a few things here just to show you what I mean by that. So let's take this dolphin for instance. If you were going to outline it, which I know some people do like to do, what you could do, instead of thinking and worrying about doing a full outline of him and going all round with a uniformed line, instead, why not break it down? Why not think, well, hang on a minute, this here, that could be a teardrop, and then that could be a teardrop, and the same with this fin. And then another teardrop. And then on the tail, thin to thick to thin lines. Teardrop, thin to thick to thin line. And then round the mouth, nose, it's the same. Thin to thick to thin. Thin to thick to thin, thin to thick to thin. And there you go, you've outlined your dolphin and you've used those strokes that I told you about without even thinking about it. This is a unicorn. Again, if you were doing the outline of the unicorn, you may use the same kind of strokes. But what about the hair? Let's put a fringe on him or her. Thin to thick to thin. Thin to thick to thin. Same round here, thin to thick to thin, thin to thick to thin. Your horn, if you were to do it that way, you could do a teardrop and a teardrop. And then do the little lines in between as thin to thick to thin. Same with the ears. And this bottom one, imagine these are Spider-Man's eyes. I know they're terrible, but if you're doing the web, so you're doing a teardrop. Sorry, I'm painting on paper, so my brush is going a little bit too dry. Another teardrop, and then you're doing thin to thick to thin, thin to thick to thin for the web. So this is just a selection of times when you will use those lines, but as I say, once you get them in your muscle memory and you do them, you won't even realise that that's what you're doing. Well, I hope that has been helpful. Just keep practicing and join me for the next video. See you, bye-bye.